And as I was driving back home, the gang leader actually called me. And I picked up the phone and he said, "Hey, where are you?" I said, "Oh my God, like I heard you got locked up. Where you at? Don't worry, we're gonna come get you, all that other stuff." And he goes, "Don't worry about that. How long is it gonna take for you to get home?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm about 10, 15 minutes away." He goes, "All right, cool." And then he hangs up the phone. Now, I had no idea that, well, I should have known better that he was setting me up, but I had become so close to them. They were such a close family to me that I just couldn't believe at the time that he would, snitch on me and send me to police. So I drove back, I pull into my garage, and then two squad cars pull up behind me, guns drawn. They arrest me right there on the spot. And that's where my mom wakes up.
Welcome to episode 19 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Jason Wang, founder of the organization FreeWorld. Their vision is to end generational poverty and recidivism. Jason and I discuss his very difficult upbringing as a child of immigrants, how he ended up in the criminal justice system, and ultimately how he changed his life and the lives of many others for the better. Along the way, he became an entrepreneur, a catalyst for change, and an incredible example for those re entering society after incarceration. Here is Jason Wang on People Are the Answer. Jason, welcome to People Are the Answer. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Love what you're working on. And to get us started here, just tell us where you're based and what your current role is.
Sure. So I'm currently based in San Jose, California, and today we've got some wonderful weather out here, so I feel really lucky for that. And I'm the founder and CEO of FreeWorld.
Okay, so we can dig into Free World obviously further later on, but maybe just a one liner on what it is.
Yeah, sure. So FreeWorld is a tech nonprofit aimed at ending generational poverty and recidivism for people with criminal records through high wage careers and asset ownership. It's a mouthful, I know.
No, but it's such important work. So thank you. I'm excited to dig in there. And but what would you say in general in your work motivates you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been through the criminal justice system myself, and so really my turning point was my experience going through the juvenile justice system, where I was housed with kids between the ages of 10 and 20 years old, and I remember the stories that they used to tell me about growing up in poverty, having their family members incarcerated, and hearing about how they didn't really feel like they had a whole lot of hope after they got released from prison. And it just felt to me that this was our country's future, and that if we didn't do something about this now, that you know the future wouldn't be as happy as I imagine it could be.
I appreciate you sharing that. And, I know you had a very difficult upbringing and moved around a lot. Can you tell us a bit about your childhood and, how it led you on your path?
Yeah, sure. So my parents were immigrants to America. My dad was from China, my mom was from Malaysia, and they came here with nothing. Didn't know the language, didn't know anybody here, didn't have any family, and so they worked under a table at restaurants, just trying to make ends meet. So growing up, the neighborhood that I lived in was extraordinarily poor. We heard gunshots down the street at all times, and it was just tough to grow up in these type of neighborhoods. Um, when I was about 5 years old, my dad ended up getting in trouble with a Chinese gang. He had actually borrowed some money to start up a trucking company, which ended up failing. And when he was unable to repay back the loan, the gang basically said that we're going to kill your entire family. And so we traveled from state to state to state, starting in New Jersey to New York to Georgia, and finally landed in Iowa. So I lived in this small town called Carroll, Iowa. And it was at that point that my dad had saved up enough money to start up his own Chinese restaurant. But if you can imagine, Iowa, there's not a whole lot of diversity there. And so I was the only Chinese kid, I think, in like a 100-mile radius. And so I had to deal with quite a bit of racism growing up. My father had a really bad temper. And so as a kid, um, there were times where he would go off. And I remember, one of the worst scenarios was when he got angry, picked up a butcher knife, and chased me around the kitchen trying to kill me. And that kind of defined um, a lot of what I felt as a kid, where I was running for my life and I always felt like I was alone.
Yeah, I mean that sounds terrifying. I can't even imagine. And having listened to some of the other podcasts you've been on, I heard some of those stories about being beaten, about being thrown out naked in a blizzard, and things like that. And I just can't imagine what that does to a young child.
Yeah, I hated my family, and you know, my father was the one who mostly um, was the one that was mostly abusing me. But as a kid, I also hated my mom because whenever I would get beat, she wasn't there to protect me. And I thought at the time that's because she didn't love me. And it wasn't until much later on that I realized that she was just as afraid of my father as I was. And so that hatred was misplaced.
Yeah, and I mean, you must have had to grow up so quickly, dealing with so much as a young child, facing abuse. I saw in one of the other things I looked at, you said, you hated the world, and I know that you attempted suicide multiple times at a young age. Um, s- s- I don't even know what to ask on it, just to say that I'm glad that you're here with us now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, whenever you're going through these dark periods in your life and you don't have a support system, um, that's when it felt to me at the time that suicide was the only option. Um, and to a certain extent, I did it to get back at my dad. So like there's this one time where we had a Chinese restaurant that, was at the bottom of a three-story building. And I remember hanging myself off of the roof of the restaurant, thinking that I would just fall head first and die in front of his restaurant. And it's because growing up, because we were so poor, all my dad cared about was money. And so, like, as a 7-year-old, I thought that the best way to get back at him was to ruin his business by killing myself in front of it. And, like, that's how bad it was back then. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah, that
you know.
that sounds incredibly difficult, and um, I what were the circumstances that led you and your mom to moving to Texas?
Yeah, so when I was 10 years old, my father told my mom that he has a wife and three kids in China, and that they were all flying to America to come live with us. And my mom had no idea that he had been previously married or that he had kids. So obviously, this was a shock to her. Once she found out the news, they actually like moved in, lived in the same apartment, worked in the restaurant with us. And the turning point for my mom was when my dad screamed at her in front of his other family and said, "I don't know why I ever married you." And it was at that moment that my mom, like, basically, she was at the end of the rope. So she had taken her car, drove out into the middle of the woods, and she was considering committing suicide. And the only thing that stopped her was that she didn't want me to grow up without a mother. And so she ended up coming back home, filed for divorce. My dad didn't even fight for me, and moved me, my grandma, and her to Texas to start basically all over again.
Wow, and about what age were you when you moved to Texas?
By that point, I was like maybe 10 and a half or 11 years old.
Okay. And so you moved to Texas, and I know you joined a gang at age 13. What was it like for you when you first came to Texas?
Yeah, so when I came down to Texas, it was honestly like a breath of fresh air because there was so much diversity in Texas, and I
You don't
started
hear
like
that
hanging out
every
with other.
day. It
I
takes
know,
someone
right?
from Iowa, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, I lived in the northern part of Dallas, and there were a lot of other kids that looked like me, and so I started making friends. But I still carried the trauma and the hatred and that feeling of loneliness that I grew up with for the majority of my life. And so, growing up in Texas, I had a single mother who was working 14 hours a night, doing a night shift job, lifting boxes and moving them. So she's a very small Asian woman. So it was really, really hard on her body. And so she couldn't really take care of me because she was working all night and would be exhausted in the morning. And also by this point, I had become like, I was kind of like trying to develop my own identity. And so I became really rebellious. And I would always like talk back. I stole her car. I stole money from her. I would go out with my friends. And eventually, at the age of 13, I ended up meeting this group of people that really felt like a family to me. Like they loved and respected me. And I felt like I could be myself around them. Well, sure enough, there were also a bunch of misfit kids. And they ended up teaching me how to do some of the crimes that they were doing. And so I ended up joining this gang. And the gang leader was kind of like a father figure to me because he was teaching me things that my dad didn't even teach me. And so that's the reason why I joined. And that's the reason why I stayed.
Yeah. Family.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the lack of the support system, I mean, that it's clear. I mean, there's no way you can blame a 13-year-old in that position for going that route.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they were my mentors. They guided me. And I felt like I had a position of importance within the gang. And so these are all kind of like hitting on the unmet needs that I felt like I had as a kid, where I didn't feel safe or secure, respected. I didn't feel like I had a community around me. And here, this was this gang that gave me all of these things and more.
So from there, you spent time in the gang, and at age 15, you end up being arrested.
Yeah, yeah. Um, at the time, we were committing a lot of robberies, and I still remember the day. Like I can still see it in my mind. I was pulling into my garage. We had robbed the house. I went out to party. I got called by the gang that, hey, one of the gang leader got locked up. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. Um, and so I was driving home, and I had spoken with the rest of the gang, and we were like, hey, we're going to find out where he's being locked up, and we're going to, blow up the jail and all that stuff and get him out. Like, we're trying to do like some Mission Impossible stuff, right? And like,
Wow.
that's how like naive and
Yeah.
crazy and like, I just didn't care about myself. And so, we came up with all these different ideas. And as I was driving back home, the gang leader actually called me. And I picked up the phone and he said, hey, where are you? I said, oh my God, like I heard you got locked up. Where you at? Don't worry, we're going to come get you, all that other stuff. And he goes, don't worry about that. How long is it going to take for you to get home? I said, oh, yeah, I'm about 10, 15 minutes away. He goes, all right, cool. And then he hangs up the phone. Now, I had no idea that, well, I should have known better that he was setting me up, but I had become so close to them. They were such a close family to me that I just couldn't believe at the time that he would, snitch on me and send me to the police. So I drove back, I pull into my garage, and then two squad cars pull up behind me, guns drawn. They arrest me right there on the spot. And that's where my mom wakes up and she comes out to the garage. And she knew that I was getting in trouble at that time, but I tried my best to hide from her the details of what I was doing. And she immediately leapt my defense. She went up to the officer and was like, hey, my son's a good kid. He would never hurt anybody. You must have the wrong person. Um, so the police told her the situation, handcuffed me, put me in the back of their squad car, and then drove me over to the interrogation site.
I'm sure that was a traumatic experience, but I know that it kind of changed how you saw your mom.
Yeah, I mean, up until that point, I hated her. And it didn't all happen at once, but
Mm.
I saw in that moment that she was fighting for me. And then while I was incarcerated, she, basically pulled out her entire life savings, $10,000. This is what she's worked her entire life for. And on the drop of a hat, she pulled out all the money to hire an attorney to help me get out of prison. The attorney only came to visit me one time, never came again. Didn't really help me in my case. And so my mom is forever traumatized and feels that attorneys are a certain way. But we ended up having to drop them. We ended up getting a court appointed attorney. And when I went in front of the judge, I ended up getting a 12-year sentence. And when I went from that courtroom over to my long term facility, my mom was so heartbroken that every single weekend she would drive 14 hours just to come see me in prison for 2 hours. And it was those like moments of love and kindness that really started to help me understand, my mom almost for the first time.
Yeah. Wow. So sentenced to 12 years at age 15. I mean, how did you take that at the time?
Yeah, I was sitting in front of the judge, and I remember him looking down on me, and he goes, "Jason, because of the severity of your crime, I'm sentencing you to 12 years inside the Texas Youth Commission." And in that moment, it felt like every emotion had just left my body. Like I didn't cry, but I also couldn't really hear. Like everything was a little bit muffled. My vision started to get a little bit blurry. Like it was just a complete state of shock. And I remember faintly hearing my family in the background crying, but it was at that point that they led me from being in front of the judge back over to my holding facility, my holding cell. And the rest of the day, I was kind of in a daze, but then it started to hit me that night. And as a 15-year-old, you think about a 12-year sentence, and it feels like you're going to be in there forever, that you're going to live and die in prison. And so for the first time in a long time, I just broke down and cried, like like harder than I've ever cried before. And the sad thing is that this is common inside of these juvenile facilities where you have kids between 10 years old and 20 years old. And yes, they've made great mistakes in their past. But after that sentencing, it feels like your life is over. And so we would hear kids break down and cry like every single night.
Wow. Yeah, it's just unbelievable to think what the system does to children. Um, and I know that it was a real mess for you, and in terms of how things were in the juvenile detention center. Um, Tell me more about what that was like, and having 20 to 30 of you in one room.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to my long-term holding facility, the way that they had architected this prison was the worst way that you could possibly architect a prison. So, first of all, like just think about the living conditions as being one huge warehouse that's cut into four corners, right? So you've got like an A, B, C, D side, and then in the middle there's a security booth. And so these were open bay prisons, which means that it's just a big wide area, and along the wall is lined with bunk beds. And so while each pod is what we call them, each pod could only hold up to 24 inmates. We were oftentimes overcrowded. So we'd have 30, 36 inmates, and they would just be lined up on the floor, just sleeping on these really, really thin pieces of plastic. And it was total mayhem in there. Um, Fights, riots, people getting raped, people making shanks, drugs, porn, money, like everything. Like it was crazy. And in 2007, the media actually started to investigate a lot of the corruption inside the juvenile justice prison system. And what they found was that correctional officers were taking 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls, putting them into isolation cells, and then sexually assaulting them. There was even one report of a warden who had a house right outside the prison, and he would literally go into the prison, take this 14-year-old boy over to his house, sexually assault him, and then put him back into the prison. All of these grievances, anything that we reported, were shifted up to management, who would then shred all the documents. And there were thousands of cases of abuse and sexual misconduct and violence and everything across the board. I mean, this was a huge deal. And matter of fact, Governor Rick Perry at the time basically hired an independent ombudsman to do an investigation on the entire system. The Texas State Senate got involved. I mean, this was a really, really big deal. But the thing was, is that at that point, that wasn't the first time that any of these things came up. This had been happening for decades, and it finally came to a boiling point.
Wow. I mean, it's sickening to think of those things that go on, and that was obviously a hell, for you and for the other people there. Um, how did you get through it? I know you changed a lot in your time there. I know you managed to get extra jobs and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part is that you're stripped away from family and you're stripped away from everybody else that you know. And so it truly is going through an experience of just like learning how to defend yourself in a very, very dangerous environment, and one that I had never been in before. Because this is my first time getting arrested. So I'd never even been arrested before, let alone gone to like a long term prison. And so my first couple of months there, I mean, I was a young and tough kid, and so I had to fight, but I was able to defend myself. And I was always like really curious. I couldn't like sit still. That's part of the reason why I always got into trouble. But like I always had this like desire to do something, right? Like if you put 6,000 kids in an empty room and give them nothing to do, you're going to go in a couple of different directions. Most of it is usually on the bad side. But I found this incredible like passion for teaching. And so I started Bible study classes where I would teach people about God, and I started GED programs. And I think that the program that I set it up, that I set up, ended up graduating more people with GEDs than their actual school
That's
did.
amazing. That's
And
awesome.
I got jobs, and I read all the time, and I wrote all the time. And so I kept myself busy in order to stay away from the negative activity that was happening around me.
I mean, that's incredible that you were able to turn that difficult situation into helping other people and giving them educational opportunities and helping them, hopefully make a better life for themselves when they get out. And um, it must have been difficult though to get through. And I certainly commend you for coming out on the other side. And I'm curious, where do you think your life would have gone had you not been arrested at age 15? Do you think you would have gone deeper into sort of that rabbit hole, or do you think you would
Yeah.
have come out at some point?
Yeah, for as bad as the prison system was, I still credit it for saving my life. Because had I not been arrested at that point in time, I would have gone on to hurt more people, and I could have either killed somebody or been killed myself. And so, like, going away for those 3.5 years was the best thing that ever happened to me. But that all being said, a lot of this is because of the love and care of my mother, who never gave up on me. Like, when she would drive these 14 hours to come see me in prison, she would always tell me, don't forget who you are. You're a good kid. And, like, this is not going to be the end. Every single week I would get these huge packets of mail. And I used to think that they were from my old homeboys or like girls I used to talk to. My mom was sending me math homework. And when she would come to visitation, she would test me on the math homework. She would send me articles on geography and science. She went up to my best friends in high school, and she would take the book and she would go to the library and photocopy, like
Wow.
literally photocopy the entire biology book and send it into prison so that way I could learn about this kind of stuff. I learned about business and international trade and stocks and religion. And that opened my mind to like a whole world of possibility that yes, while this situation right now totally sucks, it doesn't mean that I can't be something once I get out because now I know all these things. I'm so
Yeah.
curious. I want to learn more. And so, it was really her that like helped me realize that I'm not alone in this. I've got a great family support system when I get back out. And this wasn't going to be the end of the road for me.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how your mom was there for you and helped you um, get your attention filled up and learn some incredible things. And yeah, the salt and other many issues with the system that you mentioned earlier, those eventually came to a head in some hearings. Is that right?
Yeah, so during that time while I was incarcerated, they were doing a bunch of investigations and finding out all of these different reports of abuse. One example is that one time we had a riot at the facility, and security guards came in and was like restraining all the kids and all that stuff. And one security officer actually ended up taking it a little bit too far. He picked up this kid. His name is Calvin Bearfield. And matter of fact, if you look up on Google, you'll find out details about this. But he picked this 14-year-old kid up above his head and slammed him so hard into the ground that he went permanently blind in one eye. And then they left him on an ant pile. And this is in South Texas, by the way. So they put him on an ant pile in like 110-degree heat for hours. And so this kid ends up going to an infirmary. He's got ant bites all over his body. He's got severe sunburn. He's permanently blind in one eye. And like that was what was going on at all these different facilities. Like this stuff was getting pretty bad. So I was at Evans Regional Juvenile Facility at the time, and they were coming under a whole lot of allegations of abuse of power and corruption and all these other things. And so they allowed me to go outside of the prison to testify in front of the state senate. And there's where I really push for juvenile justice reform and finding different ways to bring educational and work programs into the prison so that we might have some hope to get a job and to lead a fulfilling life once we got released. And that really kind of made me like the poster child for juvenile justice reform in Texas, and really opened the door for a lot of other opportunities down the line.
I mean, what a fascinating opportunity, and you really seized it. And so from there, you were transferred. Is that correct?
Yeah, so after the hearing, a month later, so during the hearing, the Senator Whitmire actually asked the executive director, he goes, Jason appears to be doing well. Is there any chance of him getting out early? And of course, the answer is no. The next question was, is there an opportunity for Jason to get some sort of like college program? Because he's going to be here for the next couple of years. It would be a shame if he came out with absolutely nothing. If he's going to spend time in the prison system, he might as well get an education, perhaps get a degree or just something while he's incarcerated. Um, and so they, of course, said, yep, none of those programs are available. But there might be one at this one facility. And so a month after my hearing, I mysteriously get a transfer from Evans over to Giddings, which was much closer to my mom than Evans was. So Evans was about a 14-hour drive. Giddings was about a 4-hour drive. It's close to Austin, and my mom lived in Dallas. And so that was much, much better on her. But of course, when I get sent over to this other facility, there's no college, there's no education program. Like the whole thing was a complete joke. But it was better for my family just to be closer to my mom.
Yeah. So was that particular senator that took an interest in you? Do you think that was really important?
Oh, for sure. That testimony suddenly got me in front of every state legislator and every senator in Texas. So what I didn't know was while I was being incarcerated, people were working behind the scenes to help me get out. And so on June 2nd, 2008, that was the day that I was scheduled to be released. And I got released that day. And what the facility staff told me was that I was one of the first kids to ever be released on time in like 10 years. Most people end up serving like six, a year, sometimes even like 4 years over the amount of time that was originally given to them when they first go into the prison system.
That is just awful and infuriating. I mean, it's incredible that you got out when said you were going to. Um, so how long did you end up being incarcerated?
So in total, I did 3.5 years, and then I got out, and then I was on parole for about 9 years. There's this one kid who I was locked up with who came in on a 12-month sentence. Like he was supposed to get out within a year, and he had done something stupid like burglary or something. Like he broke into a car. And when I met him, he had already spent like 6 years in prison.
Oh my
6 years.
God. Wow.
I mean, he was totally screwed up in the head by that point.
Yeah. I mean, that's traumatic. That's unbelievable. And so, now that you get out, you're continue being an advocate for juvenile justice, and from there, how did you go about with employment and education?
Yeah, well, so during that hearing with Senator Whitmire, he actually gave me a card, his business card. And on the back of it, he wrote, when you get out, get in touch. I've got a job waiting for you. And on my first day that I get released, I get to go over to the state capitol in Texas, and I walk through the capitol, and every state legislator and senator, they know me, they shake my hand, I go into all these different offices. Like it was really a cool experience. And so I was very lucky coming out. I ended up getting a full scholarship to the University of Texas at Dallas. And so, I was able to get a double master's through that program. But along the way, even with all these, people advocating on my behalf, without their help, if I went up to a job interview, they would immediately say, nope, not going to hire you. And these are for like really, these weren't like really advanced jobs. Like I was applying to be a waiter, and even as a waiter, they wouldn't hire me with a criminal record. You know what I mean?
It's so backwards. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So luckily, I had a good network, and so I ended up finding some jobs. But it was bleak for the first like couple of months getting out, where you just get rejection after rejection after rejection. And this is after spending 3.5 years inside the prison system, working on policy reform, and helping kids get their GEDs and all these other things, like all these good things that have happened in my life, and all these positive changes in my life. And when I get out, people see me for the worst thing I had ever done rather than the person I am today. And so, I mean, there was a certain point where I was all like, dude, I was making more money on the streets as a gang member than a well educated adult. Like, what am I doing here? You know?
Yeah, it's really a shame how there are a lot of people where their momentum gets completely stalled because they're being judged by the worst mistake they've ever made, and not being given an opportunity to reintegrate. And we'll dig in a little bit to what you're doing with FreeWorld to help people do that better. But first, I want to just hear a little bit about the UT Dallas experience and how you got into things like rental properties.
Yeah. So after I got out of prison, I ended up joining a nonprofit program called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. And it's just like such an incredible experience. They paired me with a mentor, and my mentor was actually the person who helped me start my first business. He taught me about the stock market. He taught me about real estate. And so as a young kid, I was making money. I was working 3 jobs. I was taking 21 credit hours on each semester. So like I had 7 or 8 classes I was taking, working 3 jobs, doing my business. I kept myself incredibly busy. And I got released in 2008, so right after the financial collapse. And so all the money that I earned, I just threw into the stock market. And it was a pretty crazy ride, man. Like you couldn't lose, you know what I mean? Because everything was at rock bottom. And so I got very, very fortunate because of my mentor, like encouraging me to learn about the stock market. And so I made quite a bit of money. And I used that money to essentially buy a foreclosed property, which I then renovated and started renting out. And that was kind of like my first foray into the investment world. And I just kept doing that over and over again and building up, um, a little bit of wealth that, certainly my family never had when I was growing up.
That's incredible. It must have been really good. It must have felt really good to be able to provide for yourself in a way that you hadn't experienced.
Yeah, I bought a car. I bought my mom 2 cars. I was helping pay off the house. Like I was debt free. I got my mom out of debt. Like, for the first time, I thought I actually had an opportunity to take care of the family.
Yeah.
And it was a turning point for us.
So I know from there you did some project management and consulting work before starting your own business.
Yeah, so I started a business 6 months after I got out of prison. But I'm kind of like a born bred entrepreneur. Like it's just always been in my
Mhm.
blood to kind of like come up with crazy ideas and try them out. Um, so I started off with Wang Innovations, which was a consulting company, which is kind of funny because I was a 19-year-old kid who just got out of prison. Like, what am I going to consult on? But that business actually did well. My second business was called Bite Size Moments, and that was kind of a reset in my life. I was working in management consulting at the time. I was making, a great income. Really fell in love with this business, and basically the idea is that I could give you the feeling of giving a gift to somebody, even if you're thousands of miles away. And how it would work is that we had partnered with the military, and there were a lot of people over in Iran and Iraq who were fighting the war, and they couldn't see their wife or their kids, and so they would record a video and purchase a gift. I would then hand deliver that gift and show the person the video and secretly record the reaction, and then they could say something back. And so we would stitch all the videos together, and it was just a good feeling because, like,
Yeah.
usually it was the mom or the kids, they'd be sitting there crying, and it was just such a really emotional experience. And we had partnered with this tech company, and we were doing all these different things. Um, so at this point, I had poured basically everything that I had in the stock market into this company, right? And we were kind of nearing the end of my runway. So I started trying to raise angel capital. to help like grow the business. And at that point, we had 5 employees that were working for free for me. And so I was really trying to get to this place where like we could actually pay our employees something and like actually grow the business. And what was heartbreaking about that experience was that every single time I went into an uh, investor pitch, it would seem to go great, but then they would hear about my criminal history, and then I'd be escorted out. Um, so I basically lost everything that I had at that point. I had to start off from ground zero. When the realization that like this was not going to work finally hit me, like I just felt so empty. Like I was in front of my house crying, considering like jumping off of a bridge. My identity had been so closely linked with the business that I felt like the failure of the business meant that I had failed as a human being. Like I was the lowest of the low. I was an alcoholic at that time. I was severely overweight. I wasn't sleeping. I mean, it was just a really, really bad time in my life.
Yeah, I mean, having a lot of experience in entrepreneurship in general means you have a lot of experience failing, and some of those, especially ones that you've poured your heart and soul and wallet into, can be unbelievably draining. And it sounds like it was one of those experiences.
Yeah, I like the thing that killed me the most was the fact that these 5 people had like placed their faith in me. And there's this one woman who worked with me for free for an entire year, and it was just the thought of like I'm never going to be able to make this right to them. Like I'm penniless. I sold everything I had in order to make this business thing work, and I just felt so responsible for the failure of the company because I had 5 people that were depending on me to make this thing happen. And that was by far like the biggest learning lesson, but also the most heartbreaking experience.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly relate. I recall when my business partner and I had to close our restaurant, and I got really emotional at the fact that our employees, weren't going to have this paycheck that they counted on. And fortunately, he and I were able to get together some last bits to kind of give people a little bit of cushion when we closed. But um, just knowing that people are dependent in a way on you is it can be really draining and emotional.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you went into a dark place after that. How did you come out of that?
Yeah, so at that time, so I needed some time to just mourn the death of the company, and the company felt like my baby, right? And so it was just like I just needed time to just grieve. And after taking some time, like I started to say, well, I've got to figure something out because I've got rent to pay. I mean, I still got to eat. I still got to take care of my mom. So what do I do? And I had really had 2 choices. One, I could go back into management consulting and get paid really well. But I remember waking up every single day and hating going to work. I was in the performance improvement part of the practice. And so really my job was to make a company so efficient that they could lay off their workforce. And it felt crappy going into a company and being hated as soon as I stepped in the door because they knew what we were there for. And so that didn't feel like something that I wanted to do, even though the money was really, really good. The other side of this is that I could go into a field that I had actually stayed away from for the longest time, and that's nonprofit. Um, I when I got out of prison, I promised myself that I would never become poor again, and so all I did for many years after I got out of prison was chase money because I hated that feeling of despair and going to sleep hungry every single night. And I thought that working at a nonprofit, there's no way to make a living or a career out of it. But I also knew that, like, because of my experiences going through the prison system, that I was so deeply tied to like figuring out some solution to this problem because I kept remembering the faces and the people that I met while I was incarcerated and feeling this sadness that while I was incarcerated, I would see people get released only to come right back, or get released and a couple months later we hear that they were shot and killed on the streets. And so I said at that moment, I'm going to follow my heart. I'm going to try this nonprofit thing out. And so I moved over to New York. I worked for a nonprofit organization up there as a fundraiser, and I was working in the criminal justice space. And even though I was dirt poor, I had 5 credit cards that were completely maxed out. I was eating bread and water in order just to live. Um, I felt the most fulfilled I'd ever been in my entire life. And so I finally knew like this was my happy place. This was the place that I want to work in for the rest of my life. And it ended up being the best decision I ever made.
That's incredible to hear, and I love where that's led you with FreeWorld, and um, you know, unless you think we missed anything along the way, I'd love to start digging in and let the audience know what you're up to with FreeWorld.
Yeah. So Free World we started about 3 years ago. Free World is actually prison slang for life outside of the gates. And so as an inmate, we all used to say, "Man, I can't wait to get out into the free world." So what started off as a dream finally became a reality. And at Free World, there are a lot of different problems that you can tackle. You can tackle problems at the very front end, which is like education and childcare and preventative work that prevent people from actually going into the prison system for the first time. You can work on issues while people are actually incarcerated. But by far, the hardest problem that we saw was in the reentry population. So just to kind of like set the table, I'll kind of like talk at a high level about the criminal justice system and the problems that we're having. So in America, 1 in 3 American adults has a criminal record. That's about 70 million people. To put that in perspective, about the same number of people have college degrees in the US. Of people who get released from the prison system, 76% of them end up returning back to prison within 5 years of release. And 89% of the people who get released who then get rearrested, well, guess what? They're unemployed. When you have a criminal record, it strips away almost every opportunity you can think of. Opportunity for education. You can't get Pell Grants if you have a drug charge, as an example. You can't get access to social safety net programs, so you might not even get food stamps or unemployment benefits. And like even during COVID, for people with criminal records, if you had a business, you couldn't get a PPP loan, and so many of these businesses ended up dying. Right? You can't get a job. You can't get housing. You come out with all of these fines and fees. So you're already starting out in debt. Many of these people typically have rock bottom credit scores because it's not like they were coming from a place of wealth when they got arrested. And it's not like somebody's managing their finances while you're locked up. And so when you get out, like nobody's there to help you.
Every negative odds imaginable are stacked up on top of these individuals.
Yeah, like how are you supposed to make it? Like I couldn't even get a job as a waiter, right? Like making minimum wage. And we expect for this 70 million people who have been released from the prison system to go through this horrifying, traumatic, dangerous experience while in prison and then suddenly become a positive, contributing member of society once released. Like, how is that supposed to work out, right? So when we looked at the issue, it appeared to us that the number one thing that we could do that was sustainable and could have a generational effect on the people that we serve was to help people get into a living wage career. And so when we looked across the industry, we said, okay, well, how do we get past a criminal record? Because if you have the criminal record and skills, well, you're never getting a job. If they don't look at the criminal record, most people don't have the skills, and so they don't get a job. So, is there an industry that has such a tight labor shortage that they're willing to bypass the criminal record? And is this a skill that we can teach people very quickly? And what does compensation look like once they get into these careers? And what we realized is that the solution was trucking. So in the trucking industry, it's one of the most common jobs in America. 72% of all goods in America come on the back of a truck. There are 3.5 million truck drivers all across the United States. And over the next 10 years, they need 1 million plus new drivers just to keep up with current economic demand. So it's an industry that is readily accepting of people with criminal records. We can train somebody for as little as $7,000. They get into a career in 45 days, and my students are earning $50 to $120,000 their first year at their job. And everybody gets hired. We have a 98% hiring rate 4 weeks after graduation. It's scalable. We're doing this all across the country. We're doing this in like 7 states, and hundreds of people are going through this program and getting jobs. And guess what? Our recidivism rate compared to a national average of 76%, our recidivism rate is less than 2%. When somebody has the ability to take care of their family, they're not running out of the door to commit crime. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
they finally have a
100%.
chance. And these are local trucking jobs where you're home every single night with your family. So it's just been an incredible experience over the past 3 years.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you're doing. You're changing lives in transformational ways, and you're also helping industry and helping the economy at the same time. And for the viewers' understanding, we basically met through a LinkedIn post. I'd heard of FreeWorld, and a mutual friend, shared some information about it on LinkedIn, and I had actually been talking about a friend that was or been talking to a friend that was recently incarcerated about his next step. He just felt really good about these job interviews he'd had. And of course, they saw his history and it didn't happen. And then I just happened upon the post about Free World, and I sent him the information, and he signed up. He's in trucking school now. And, he's getting ready to start a career. And he's so excited and so thankful for this opportunity.
Yeah, we had met because we ended up talking to that student and asked, who referred you to us? And in that short period of time that he applied, I think it's only been like a couple of weeks. Yeah, I think he's already in trucking school, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's how fast we work. And
Yeah.
soon he'll graduate, and we have like getting people jobs is the easiest part of our program. There are very few workforce development programs I've seen across the United States that have as high of a job placement rate as we do.
I love it. I mean, just giving these individuals that type of opportunity, knowing that their history isn't going to hold them back. I mean, you're doing such important work for them, and on so many levels. I could talk about it for a while, but I'm glad that I found you guys, and I've certainly passed it along to other parties, and hopefully gotten some other balls rolling, and um, can continue putting people in these positions. And one thing I really appreciate about Free World and its kind of scalability is that you're tech enabled. Can you tell us more about how you use tech to facilitate?
Yeah, so our tech is designed to create a incredible experience for our students. Like I want our students to smile every single time that they use our technology. It automates our program and all of our wraparound services. It's highly scalable, meaning that I can spin up a new site anywhere in America within like 90 days. And it basically solves all of the major roadblocks that people typically face once they get out of prison. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So number one, most people that get out of prison, if they don't have a strong support system at home, they don't have any transportation, meaning that they have to get on a bus, maybe take that 3 hours across town to go to a DMV office where they have to spend 8 hours over there, and then they end up coming back home and they're just totally exhausted. Well, we have an Uber for Business account. And so on our platform, people can click a button, a text message gets sent out to them with a pre approved voucher, and they can take that to use on whatever they need, whether it's for childcare, whether it's get to a job, whether it's go to classes, anything. So that's number one. We pay for the bill. The second thing is identification. And this is something that most of us take for granted. But if you've ever gone to a DMV, particularly a DMV that's pretty busy, then you'll probably appreciate the experience that we're giving to our students. So if you need help renewing your driver's license, getting a social security card, or getting your birth certificate, within 20 minutes, we get all of these documents for you online, we pay for it, and we ship it over to your house. And for somebody who has just gotten out of prison, who don't have any of these documents, this is not only a huge time saver for them, but this is a administrative burden that like doesn't really provide value and is extraordinarily difficult to make your way through if you don't have somebody to guide you. So like if you need to get a birth certificate, you have to get a social security card to get your birth certificate, but you can't get a social security card without a birth certificate. So you know what I mean? Like we've unintentionally created these systems that make it so difficult to get these documents when it can just be automated online and we can do
Yeah.
it at a push of a button. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The other thing that we do is we've got instructors on staff, and so people can sign up for classes online and from their phone join Zoom classes with us, and we educate them and teach them everything that they need to know in order to pass their test to get a commercial driver's permit, so CDLA permit. And then once somebody gets their permit, we then send them to a local trucking school. We pay the tuition for the trucking school, but we also pay our students a total of $2,000 to go to school full time.
Yeah.
And that's how, within a 45-day period from application to getting into a career, that's how we're able to do this so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen it firsthand. I mean, it's incredible. Um, it really is. And um, just knowing that there's all these people that are having this tough time, and that you help them around these absurd boundaries that are put up for them. I'm really excited to watch this grow.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing to mention too that is that as a nonprofit, one of the things that we depend on is philanthropy. Well, we actually have an earned revenue model where when students go through a program, we use income share agreements to allow our students to pay it forward. So what that means is that we invest all the capital up front to get somebody into a career. As long as they're making $50,000 a year, then they pay it forward to help the next student go through school. What we're also exploring is direct hire placement fees, where trucking companies are actually paying us anywhere between $3,000 to $18,000 to place students at their companies. And so over the next couple of years, I think that we'll be able to grow and have 90% of the money coming into the organization coming from earned revenue rather than philanthropy.
I mean, I can't overstate how incredible that is, especially for a nonprofit organization. Any nonprofit that is able to have some level of self sustainability, their impact can be exponentially greater. And so I see that for you guys. I think absolutely these trucking companies should be paying you for placement. And I love that both those dollars and the students that are going to pay it forward, those dollars are going back into growing and investing in the next people to come through. I love what you've built with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed that the people closest to the problem are usually the farthest away from the resources to be able to implement solutions. And here we have a program where our graduates are literally reinvesting in their own communities. Um, Unfortunately, many of our students have brothers and sisters and fathers and family members and friends who have all gone through the criminal justice system. And so when they graduate and they finally have an opportunity to pay it forward, they're inviting all their friends and family to apply for our program as well.
Yeah, that's great. I saw that FreeWorld's vision is to end generational poverty and recidivism, which is beautiful. How do you see this evolving in the future? Beyond trucking and otherwise.
Yeah, so over the next 6 years, we're building out the infrastructure and capacity to graduate 100,000 people on a yearly basis. And Free World doesn't stop at trucking. Like we want there to be a vocational program within Free World for welding, for construction, for geothermal drilling. I learned about this for the first time because a private company actually wanted to hire us to build out a training program for them. And these are jobs, well, first of all, they are more than happy to hire people with criminal records. And second of all, these are jobs that are paying $170,000 per year. So this is not a low wage income by any means. So we certainly see pathways with that as well. The way that we think about, and the reason why we spend so much time and effort on the financial piece is that when you grow up in childhoods like mine, we were never taught how to manage money. And matter of fact, most of us thought that we would die by the age of 21. And so, what's the point of saving and investing if you're not even going to live to see it? So we've developed programs within FreeWorld where we will automatically link up with your credit score and actually help to repair your credit in the background without any interaction from you. So like basically, you connect your information over to our platform. We fix your credit score and just basically send you a report, taking your credit score from like 500 all the way up to 720. And so we do that for the students. We have budgeting tools that helps you get an idea of where your money is going. Most of our students, when they get out of prison, they're doing all of the budgeting in their head. But as you get more, um, once you stabilize and start building a career and start building a little bit of wealth, it then becomes very difficult to just manage everything in your head. And so we built in tools and systems that actually show you this is how much money you've earned over this period of time. This is how much your expenses are. This is what your net worth is. And we actually push and help people to increase their net worth over time and to eliminate debt. We help people start up trucking companies for the first time. We help people buy a home for the first time, purchase that first car. We help people get off parole early. We help them with child support and restitution and all these different things. And the idea is that for these individuals, once they're able to get into a good place in their lives where they have food, water, shelter, basically, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, once we solve for the first couple of bottom runs, they're then able to present a better life for their families. And a statistic that really broke my heart that I learned about a couple of years ago is that 70% of kids who have a parent who's incarcerated will end up in the criminal justice system themselves. I'm a living, breathing example of that statistic because my father was involved with gangs. And so, if we can help these parents, reintegrate into their families' lives and be able to provide that support, there is a significantly lower chance that their kids will end up in the system themselves, therefore ending that generational cycle of poverty and recidivism.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, to be able to stop that cycle can, even to whatever degree, is going to go a really long way. So I think that work is incredibly important and impactful. And um, I'm excited to see where FreeWorld goes and to help as I can and with your efforts, and excited to see all the lives that it changes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So having done what you have so far, you've really helped a lot of people along the way, while of course helping yourself. And it's been really cool to hear your story. I appreciate you sharing it. And do you have a story of when you really saw how your work could affect change, or an epiphany moment?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we see these stories on a daily basis, but I'll give you one example. So there's this guy, his name is Jose, and he used to live in San Francisco. And he had been in and out of prison his entire life. Like the last, sentence that he did was a 10-year sentence. And after he got out of prison, he was hooked on drugs. He was homeless on the streets. He would go in and out of jails. Like it was just a really, really bad system. And one day he finally said, "You know what? I'm sick and tired of this, but I don't know what to do in order to pull myself out of this rut." So he ended up contacting us, and he said, "Hey, I'm interested in this trucking program. Never done it before, but I'm interested. I'm curious to learn more." So we ended up, paying for his tuition to go to school. We gave him some money in order to just to live. Um, we did a filming session with this organization that wanted to shoot a short documentary with us, and he pulled up in a Mercedes. And during that filming session, it's actually on one of the pre-roll videos. He talked about how when he had gotten out his last time, him and his girlfriend had a combined income of like $15,000 for the entire year living in San Francisco.
Wow.
A year later, they were making $170,000 together driving buses.
Wow.
He bought a house. He went from homeless to showing a picture of his brand new house in California. I can't even afford a house out here. I mean,
It's
he
amazing.
started two companies since then. Like he's no longer driving buses. Now he's a business owner. Like he came up in like a flashy suit and all these things. Like he has made a complete 180 from where he used to be. And like now his dream is to help other people coming out of the system. So he's hiring people who have come out of the system for his businesses now.
Yeah.
And this is within a period of like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, and I love the example that it sets in terms of investing in people is investing in the world. Like the title says, people are the answer, and it's you take good care of people and they'll continue to pass it on.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, in our program, they're literally paying it forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. S- So I know that you had a tough childhood, but was there any experience when you were a kid that showed you the importance of giving back, or maybe looking back on it, you saw that?
um,
Or when did you learn the importance of giving back?
I don't think I necessarily like had like a moment where I was like, oh yeah, giving back is good. Um, it really came out of like necessity, where I started teaching the Bible study classes and GED programs. Because to be honest with you, I was just bored. I was bored. I had nothing else better to do. And in doing it, I started to feel a whole lot of joy of teaching people. Like it's crazy because like we had kids who were 18 years old and could barely read and write or even do math. And these are like pretty hardcore kids that have been through a pretty tough childhood experience. And when you see that light bulb moment where they didn't understand how to do this one thing, and then it clicks in their head, and then you just see them become so hungry to learn more because for the first time in their lives, they felt like they did something, they accomplished something good. That was what like really kind of spurred me on through the rest of my life. I mean, after I got released from prison, I just wanted to make money. And so I wasn't really kind of in the giving back mode just because I needed to, just to like prove to myself that I could do it. But after I was able to solve for that, I mean, this is the work that I do on a daily basis now. So this truly is my second chance to give out second chances.
Yeah, that's a fun way to look at it, and the second chances go such a long way. And I know that there were only so many people that believed in you on the early side and along the way, but as your career has developed and your work has developed, has there been anyone that you've considered a mentor?
Oh, for sure, man. Like I wouldn't be here today without my mentors. My first mentor, Bob Frankenfeld. He was the first guy that Prison Entrepreneurship Program introduced me to, and he's been a dear friend ever since then. Our board of directors, we've got Matt Mosheri, Jason Green, Andy Bromberg, Kumar Garg. They've been with me through thick and thin, and like there have been challenges along the way of starting up a tech nonprofit. And not only have they been able to guide me on the professional side, but they actually care about me as a human being. And like, I just feel so grateful to have them in my corner. And there have been so many other people along the way. Like, when I got out of prison, funnily enough, juvenile parole, it's not terrible. Like, Martha Henderson was my first parole officer, and she was incredible. I'm even still friends with one of my adult parole officers after I switched over to an adult system. I've had teachers and people from the church and all these other people that have just been so wonderful to me in my life. And yeah, I really just give all the credit to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible the amount of impact that one person can make on another's life, and they don't always realize in the moment how much they're helping. But it shows how far it can go. Even someone like the parole officer just trying to do a good job.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of bad ones, but the good ones really stand out.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean parole officers.
So, is there anything that you'd like to ask me?
Yeah, I mean, you are a successful entrepreneur. You have an incredible platform. When you think about impact in the world, like what is your role in this entire ecosystem? How do you think about giving back?
For me, in terms of my personal role, I think a lot of it is relationships. I certainly give, my time and talent and treasure, as they say, the three T's. I do, but I see myself as having a special ability to find good people doing good things and put them together to multiply their impact. So I think for me, a big part of it is kind of arranging the good people, helping them in the right places, helping get, and with those people, kind of helping them expand their platform and their message, similar to what I'm trying to do with the podcast. And, I really just try to focus on things that I'm passionate about that help people a lot. I mean, I tend to think that I'm an empathetic person, and I know I had a fortunate upbringing, and I know my grandparents who went through the Holocaust didn't, and I know that you had a very tough upbringing and so on, and so I really feel for people when I hear their difficult stories, and I want to do everything I can to give everybody a chance. I mean, I truly believe that people have incredible potential, regardless of their background. And I think so many people out there judge people based on their background or a single mistake or just their past in general. And I'm just trying to put groups of people together that believe that everyone's capable.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and I also feel very lucky to be on this podcast and to be in this a small piece of your very large network.
Oh man, I mean I appreciate that. I'm honored to have you, and I don't want to portray that I think that I'm any more special than anyone else trying to create impact out there. But hopefully my special way can help.
Absolutely.
So the question that I'm asking every guest is this: if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Yes, we have a whole lot of problems in this world, but we certainly have the resources to be able to solve some of like the world's most pressing issues. And in a world where there's so much inequality and wealth disparities, uh, I'm curious about how we can activate like the most powerful, influential, and wealthiest families in the world to be more generous in their giving and to work together in partnership with us to solve these big problems. Like, there's no reason why anybody should be hungry in the world. There is no reason why we should be having all this conflict that we're having, around the world. The incarceration rates, healthcare, education, debt, poverty, these are all solvable. But we kind of have to get out of our own way. I mean, we to a certain extent perpetuate these issues over and over again. And so that's one thing I would change is the ability to really activate individuals to think more about the person next to them rather than about themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think not only the more empathy that we can drive, but just the ability to work together for everyone to realize that we're all in this together on this planet, and it benefits all of us for everyone to be happy. And it's so frustrating to see all the division and the focus on differences, and um, a handful of loud people that don't get it, causing problems to grow. I hope that we move in the direction of having a world that understands and values individuals more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm sure everyone listening has just felt the same way that I do about your story. It's incredible. It's moving. It's an example that you've set for so many in terms of where you came from and where you are now and where you're going. Um, how can people listening best support you and your impact?
Yeah, so the easy things are amplifying the message. And of course, as a nonprofit, we're always looking for philanthropic support. But I would actually encourage people to really just take some time to just educate yourself on on issues that we're seeing in the criminal justice system. I personally love the movie Just Mercy and the book Just Mercy. Um,
Yeah.
there's another movie called Shot Caller. And so, like, I mean, if you don't want to read and do all this other stuff, like watch these movies because they're good movies and stuff like that too,
I
right?
mean,
Uh,
I just to interject briefly, like I think that content can be so impactful and powerful. Actually, Scott Budnick, one of the producers on Just Mercy,
yeah,
his name came up on another episode recently with Holly Flowers, and we were talking about Just Mercy, and it's one of those things where content is one of the few ways to get people's attention for longer periods of time these days. Very high quality content,
yeah.
and having the message mixed in with the story is just can be so powerful, especially for people that just aren't going to take the time to do extensive research.
Exactly, yeah. Like watch some of these engaging films that like give you a better perspective on how the criminal justice system works in America. The documentary that I would highly recommend is called 13th. It's on Netflix. That's powerful.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so I would just ask people just take a moment, in your free time, you can put it in the background or whatever it is, but um, take some time to just learn about this problem and why it's impacting our lives.
Yeah.
And if it causes a stir in your heart to do something, perhaps look at a couple of organizations in the space that are doing incredible work and potentially support them.
Jason, thank you so much for being open and transparent with us and sharing your story. I'm sure just hearing it's going to go a long way for some individuals out there. So, thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely, it's been a blast. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. To find out more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.